This is another Path of Zen podcast. My name is Mark, and I've been a practicing Buddhist for about 35 years. The last time I was actually in a Dharma Center would be about 1997. And one of the reasons that I left the Western Dharma Centers was that I was finding that the attitudes and the practices that were going on in the Dharma Centers were not really something that I was interested in. When I departed the Dharma Centers, there was a movement called Engage Buddhism, and where there was a view that Buddhists should be more worldly, and that we Buddhists should be out in the community to promote things like vegetarianism, definitely to promote peace as in an anti-violence or anti-war position, and to definitely be politically engaged in social issues that people felt would benefit society or benefit us as a whole. And this is something that I felt was not something that I wanted to engage in. For when I first started Buddhism in about 1986, 87, the teachers told me that the Dharma Center is an apolitical place, that politics, that they weren't going to be involved in politics, and they were not going to be involved in social issues. And this is something that stuck with me, and it's something that I've always felt, that Buddhism in itself has never really been a political force. It's not like the Christian right or some of the Islam sects that have taken over countries. Rather, Buddhism was more of a spiritual path that would say, detach from these worldly identities, and that's what politics basically is. It's a worldly identity. It's where you take a political position and you make an identity out of it. And this can be a conservative position, a liberal position. It can also be a political position based upon identity, whether it be race or sexual orientation or identification. And what Buddhism has always said is, this is not a concern of the religion. This is not a concern of the path. And that it should be seen for what it is, which is worldly attachment and worldly identification. And it was viewed as a hindrance. And for a very long time, I always thought that was the correct view, the appropriate view that the Dharma Center should take. And I took this view personally myself, where I, as a Buddhist, would not engage in any political position or speak to any political direction. This, of course, changes as the years go on and we roll into the 90s and then about 1997, 98, when suddenly there is a political winds within the Dharma Centers, and not having an acceptable view on some particular political issues was not welcoming anymore. So people that were conservatives were finding themselves not welcome. People that were not comfortable talking about certain political issues were not welcome anymore. And I felt that this was not a correct place, not correct at all. Though I did not speak out about any of these things, I just simply decided that I was done with that kind of Dharma Centers. I was no longer interested in being part of a political activist group or a center that was a recruiting ground for political activism. I was definitely more for the spiritual part of Buddhism. And so I departed, and when you kind of move off on your own, you turn to books and various other kinds of materials as your teachings. So when you look at doctrinal Buddhism coming out of the Nikayas, and then the Tripadakas, and then the Dharmapada, and then the Chinese Buddhist canon, and then the various writings of Zen masters and Chinese Zen masters and Japanese Zen masters, you really become to understand that Buddhism and Zen for thousands of years is a patriarchal system. It's one of hierarchy where, I hate to say it, but the senior monks get to have the shots, get to see what happens, and the junior ones follow. And it's also an aristocratic system. These, even up to the 1930s, China was very much in an imperial system, and Japan, clear up to 1945, was an imperial system. So we're only talking about countries that with less than 100 years ago were heavily influenced by an imperial aristocratic system and even royalty. And even today, there's a lot of medieval holdovers that are still in Zen, with the Zen royalty. The Dharma transmission is a Zen royalty. You're making one a prince, an heir to a dynasty. So these systems, as you really look at them, kind of buck against the American vibe. And we Americans are we've never grown up in a system of royalty. We don't really know of kings and queens, and we don't have this sense of duty to a royalty caste, or we know nationalism, and we know being patriotic, but that's more to we're nationalistic to a country of the people who identify themselves as patriotic to a set of ideals. And most people would say, well, that's the Constitution, the set of the inherent rights of the men and women of the land. So, Buddhism, right off the bat, bumps up against a lot of these notions. Also, Buddhism is coming from countries that are extremely conservative. Japan is very conservative. China's conservative, and even in going into their imperial systems and their systems of royalty, we find out that they were even more conservative than we've ever thought before. In a culture based upon honor and merits, where accusations were basically met with duels of the sword, and God's going to pick the winner sort of combat. This is very foreign to Americans and into the West. So when we brought over this system, we brought it over. We just didn't say, well, let's go look at the philosophy and then just bring over that. And it doesn't work that way. When you bring over Buddhism, you bring over the whole kit and caboodle. And so you're bringing over this medieval you're bringing over a medieval royalty system, whether you like it or not. Whether it be Theravadan, whether it be Tibetan, whether it be Zen. It's a medieval holdover that is foreign to people. So now we have this issue where we want our Zen centers to be democratic. We want the students want to have a say in how things go. But the system isn't designed for that. It never was. So then when we make the changes, we say, well, we're going to still be monks and nuns, but we're going to change the rules so that we don't have to follow, the Vinaya or the way they did it in Japan or the way they do it in China. We can do it differently. And this kind of leads to we're then not really Buddhist. We're sort of like pseudo-Buddhist or half-Buddhist. This becomes an issue when you're going against doctrine because it's convenient. So this becomes how does this work? And I started to realize, that this creates a lot of tensions with people. And a lot of people who ordain into Theravada or Zen start to run against these issues rather quickly of how does this work? Because if they were in Burma, Thailand, or Japan, they would have support systems and they would be able to survive as a monk relatively easy without a whole lot of difficulties. But here in the West, it doesn't work that way. We don't have a base laity that can support us. We don't really have monasteries that we can go to and live for years on end as a monk with absolutely no problems, where we can renounce the worldly ways and really focus on our meditation. Those just don't exist. And going over to Burma and Thailand and Japan as a Westerner to go study in their systems, though it can be done, it's not easy. And for a lot of people, a lot of Westerners that have tried that, success is not all that common. Most only last for a few months, if that, then they're done with it. So this becomes a kind of an issue question that I have looked at, and I have come to the opinions that we kind of need to, as a Buddhist community, as I would say, more of a Western Buddhist community, to seriously take a look at these systems that we brought over here and realize this is not working for us. That our culture is not at all geared for this authentic Buddhism that we brought over. Fortunately, though, the Buddha did give us a way out, a path, which is called the Pure Land Buddhism. It's also can be called the path to bliss. These are. So yeah, the Buddha, this would also be called the land of ultimate bliss, or some people call it the Western paradise. But it's, in short, it's basically the belief, the faith in the Amitabha, which would be the cosmic Buddha, or the Buddha of time and space. In that, when we pass from this current world, through the faith in Amitabha will guide us to a world in where we can learn the Dharma and become Buddhas. And this is here in America, there is the Buddhist Churches of America, the BCA, which is primarily Japanese, and some Chinese, but mostly Japanese. We really don't have a American version of the BCA, though there are Americans in the BCA and there are American preachers within the BCA. It is ultimately controlled by the Jodo Shinshu and Japanese. And most of the books and the hymns and the chanting and the services are in Japanese. So we need to look at this as if we want to build a stepping stone in where we're not bringing over this medieval religious system of China, of this medieval monasticism of of Asia that just simply doesn't work here in the United States, then we need to seriously consider, then we need to build a Pure Land school that is uniquely Western, where people who choose to go to college and get those Buddhist studies graduate school certificates, they have something to do. They don't have to go try to bash down the doors of these medieval systems that's going to reject them outright and call them anti-Dharma, just anti-Buddhist, Dharma destroyers, and so on and so forth, because that doesn't work. So we build a Buddhist church based on Pure Land principles, where everybody's accepted, where everybody from all walks of life can come, whether you be any race, any color, any sexual identification, anything. You don't even have to be Buddhist. You can be Jewish, you can be Islamic, you can be Shinto, you can be Hindu, doesn't matter. You can come and join the services, listen to the teachings of the Buddha, and recite your faith to the Amida Buddha, so that you can go to the land of bliss. This is basically what I see as the first step. This would be something that Americans can go to. It's easy, it's simple, it doesn't require monasticism, it doesn't require incredible hard sutra study, it doesn't require making extreme leaps of faith, and it also does not require seeking enlightenment. This has been a big issue in a lot of the monastic systems that we brought over, is this whole concept of enlightenment, of those who can find it and those who just never seem to get it. So, in the other counterpart to what I want to talk about here is that there's been a movement to kind of restart the old Norse religion, which as I have done research on Norse mythology, it very much resembles a lot of the Pure Land faith, in where the honored dead are taken to Valhalla, and a lot of times they call it, you have to be a warrior to go to Valhalla, and that's not true. You can be as long as you are a good and righteous person, and more or less have paid your tribute to the Norse religious deities and the concepts, you go to Valhalla. Even though most of the northern men were warriors, Vikings, and everybody, every man in the northern countries is considered a warrior. Whether you have a sword or a pitchfork, you're a warrior. So, there's been this idea that we should, revive the Norse mythologies, and we all should become Norsemen, and pray to Odin to be taken to Valhalla when we die, so that we may, further gain glory, which would be Buddha studies or study the Dharma. Which is I would say, more of a fanciful idea, but it's not realistic. Buddhism is something that is well established in America and in the West. The colleges have included Buddha studies as a curriculum and as an actual path in the colleges. You can get a doctorate in Buddhism. So the system is already there to kind of crank out Buddhist ministers and associate ministers. And we already have a large number of churches. There's no churches, there's no system, there's no Norse churches, nobody's giving a degree in Norse studies. There's really nothing there that would bring any interest in a Norse religious teachings or theology to the West. And I think furthermore that it would be seen as divisive. I think a lot of people would kind of feel unwelcomed by a Norse church, and they would say, well, you only want white heterosexual people. You don't want anybody else. And I can see where that would create issues, whereas a Buddhist Pure Land faith would be come on, we don't care. We know we're going to teach you the words of the Dharma, and that's that. Though as for being political in the churches of Buddha, I still have a reservation about that. I have seen political winds change greatly. When I started Buddhism, it was pretty much a right-leaning, organized, leaning politics, and then over the years, the wind shifted to the left. And they are now in, I would say the leftist Marxist kind of winds that are blowing through the Dharma Centers. But it's going to change again, and it'll blow the other way. The issue when you bring politics into your Dharma Center is that you will risk the destruction of your own Dharma Center and your churches by kind of setting in stone these political positions that are going to change. We know that the Dharma is not going to change, and that the teachings of Buddha are not going to change. But the political winds do, and that's why that's why I kind of wince whenever I hear about these political agendas being brought up, especially when people say, well, what is the position of Buddhism on, the LBGQ or the gay community, or what is your position on transsexualism, or what is your position on other, on the different races to be able to achieve enlightenment? And the answer is that there is no position. The Buddha has already stated that if you are a sentient being, you have the potential to achieve enlightenment and Buddhahood. That's it. Doesn't mean you are, and it doesn't mean that you can or cannot. It's just you have the potential. It's up to you as the individual, as to your own commitment and faith as to whether or not you achieve these things. Now, there are some people that will say that you have to believe in reincarnation and rebirth and the Buddhist realms and pretty much everything in the doctrine in order to be called a Buddhist, and I disagree with that. I think that if you believe in the teachings, even one word of the teachings, you are a Buddhist. Now, to become a Buddhist disciple, that's a whole other issue. That's taking the precepts, and that's taking on something that is a little bit more of a bigger deal than just being a Buddhist. As for being a monk or a nun within a Buddhist context, again, that is a whole nother thing. So that has basically been some of my thoughts lately about the whole political and the politicization of Buddhism. I understand there's going to be more conservative views and more liberal views. And I understand that there's going to be a lot of, debate of what is Buddhism and what isn't Buddhism. Sort of like the old thing of what is Zen and what is not Zen. That's a debate currently going on. And it's not really something that I particularly like to come out and say, well, this is Zen and that is not Zen, because honestly, I'm a nobody. I mean, what I think is Zen is what I think Zen is. I think it's just part of the conversation. And just as much as anybody else. It doesn't mean I'm right or I'm wrong. It just means in part of the conversation. But mostly, what I say bring or help anybody to take one step closer to enlightenment and Buddhahood. And if the answer is yes, then great. And I'm glad to have help. If the answer is no, then correct me. I do want to, if I am saying things that, it's truly, truly wrong, then these are things that need to be brought to my attention. However, for the most part, that has not been the case And, nobody's infallible. Nobody is perfect. People say things all the time, which can be, quite stupid, quite blunderling wrong. It happens, and sometimes we could say something today and say something totally different tomorrow because we have a different enlightenment tomorrow. It happens too, and that's the same thing for you too. What a person says today and what they think today, well, tomorrow they may think something different and say something different too. So I look at that and I see that everybody has the potential for changing and everybody has the potential for growth. When people look at a person and they say, oh, you can't change, you can't grow, or they look at themselves and they say, I'm not going to change, I'm not going to grow, that's a problem. And that's something that we need to look at. It's something we need to discuss maybe in the future. But right now, that kind of position is not one that is going to facilitate towards enlightenment and Buddhahood. And that sometimes a lot of what I'm seeing out there is these very entrenched positions that really service nobody, and all they end up doing is going to divide to the point where people are going to get hurt, physically hurt. Because sometimes when there's nothing to talk about, people start raising their fist, and that happens a lot too. So I am definitely one for, anti-violence. I look at if a person is refusing to grow, refusing to have any possibility of growth or possibility of change, then, come back later. We'll try again some other day. Maybe in a year, maybe 5 years, maybe 20 years from now. You have a different view. We'll try. I'm not here to beat anybody into submission, and I'm not here to force my will on anybody. That has never been the way of Buddhahood, or the way of Zen, or the way of or the teachings. The teachings basically is that we are here when you are ready, and not everybody's ready. And that much I have come to understand. A lot of people come to Zen and they learn a few things, and they learn how to meditate, and they pick up a few things, but then they realize that they're not ready. And we realize as teachers that they're not ready. And there's no shame when they, say, gee, this is great, but they just don't come back. And, that doesn't mean that they'll never come back. It's often is the case where people will show up much later on in life, and they'll say things like, oh, well, when I was 20, 30, I checked this out, and then I, went off, got married, and had kids, and then they come back in their late 40s or early 50s. It happens a lot. A lot of people have read books when they were younger, and then they got busy with, family and career, and then later returned back. Maybe they want to take up a path of a more serious look at Buddhism. The same thing with Christianity. A lot of times people in the later parts of their life get very active in the church, and that's kind of expected. All right, so I think I've said a lot, and I think that there's a lot here to consider, maybe some things that we can talk about in a future podcast. All right, take care.